Okay, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast, and I'm joined by a very, very special guest today, ultra marathon runner Jon Shield, who has competed in some incredible races so far, including an Arctic race, a race across the Amazon jungle. We'll be talking about that one. A lot of races say introduce themselves as the toughest race in the world. But I really think when we get into the Amazon one, that'll take the biscuit. But as well as that, Jon has an extensive sporting background in personal training. He's competed in other sports outside of running, I believe. So we'll find out more about that as well. We're also going to be talking about his future plans with some big upcoming races. And as well as all of this, as always with my interviews, the mindset that it takes to reach such a high level in one of the toughest sports in the world. Ultra running has a level of endurance that is practically superhuman to us mere mortals. So, Jon, thank you very much for coming on the show, and it's a pleasure to talk with you. To be honest, it's a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Liam. That's really good. Thank you.
No problem at all. So, like I say, with yourself, you've done a lot with your life so far. There's a lot more to come. When I was researching this, it's like you've lived a few lives in one, you know? So, my fun job was to sort of condense that down a little bit. Now, when we go back in time, which is where I'll start before you were running, as I understand it, when I was researching this, you've always been quite athletic. You've always been quite a sporty person, if you like. I came across references to rugby, references to shooting. Obviously, I came across the parachute regiment side of things that you were doing as well. So, were you always involved in sports from sort of a very young age, or was it something that started at a certain point in your life a little bit later, if that makes sense?
No, it's always been a part of my life from whenever I can remember. Really, it's such a young age. I think it was just at school. You'd either be playing football, rugby, cricket, going swimming. There was always that opportunity there, which you're very fortunate to have, I guess. I was always verging away from running things. I wasn't a good runner. I wasn't fast at long distance. I wasn't fast at short distance. But if I was playing rugby, I was good at rugby. I was good at football, cricket. I had good hand-eye coordination. So those were more my type of events then. And obviously after school as a kid, probably not so much nowadays, but back then when there was less technology, I mean, there still was computers and so on there, but you would go out and play in an evening and you'd come in for when it was dark, and that was that. So obviously I think it's a little bit different nowadays, perhaps, but certainly back then that was what you did. You just played sport, or were out riding a bike, and that was kind of your life as a child. So yeah, I was very fortunate that the school I was at gave me those opportunities. And then, yeah, I was just an active kid in general.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's always been a drive of yours to compete. I love that. And as I mentioned, just to give a brief reference to this a little bit before we go headlong into the running side of things, just to set the stage, if you will, with your athletic background. I also came across something to do with shooting competitively. What is that to do with, Jon? Because I found references in your in another one or two interviews that you did in written format. Can you tell us a little bit about that side of things as well, please?
Yeah, so the school I was at the time was a shooting school, and so they'd have a national shooting competition. So I used to do that, and I came second in the whole national schools league. Would have won, but someone was allowed to be included because their team for some reason got disallowed, but he was allowed individually, and he was a fantastic shooter. So yeah, I got second in the sort of national schools league. Then got into the Great Britain under 21 shooting squad at the age of 13. So I did that for a while, but it was mainly at school. I did go to these Great Britain training camps and so on, did go abroad with them on one occasion. But to be fair, it was something I lost interest in quite quickly, because you can imagine at 13 years old, all these people that are older than you are training, and they're the golden goose because they're going to the Olympics or the World Championships, and Great Britain had a good squad. So you were kind of left sort of out of the way because you've got plenty of years. It doesn't really matter. You turn up for a long weekend and just sort of get on with it or do whatever. So you'd wait around, hang around a lot. And I'm not that sort of person that likes to just hang around and waste time in a weekend. And that's what I thought that was. Obviously, and I completely understand that, you know, when you've got these fantastic shooters and they've got upcoming competitions, whether it's the Worlds, the Olympics, this was a 2-2 target shooting, then, you know, they're going to invest heavily in those people, which is understandable. But I think that's why I lost interest, because I didn't have much feedback there, much interaction while I was there, that, you know, I could go and play football or rugby on one of these weekends or go and watch Man United. You know, it was all things that I could do that I got some instant gratification from, as opposed to, you know, having to play the long, slow game. And yeah, you know, when you're that age, you don't really have that sort of patience and time. You want to be on the go and active and doing things that your friends are doing as well. So, yeah, it was good to do. It's good to say you've done it, and it was interesting, but it wasn't for me for long term, and I don't miss it at all. I don't really regret anything in life. So it was a chapter, and then you move on.
Absolutely. But you moved on to new challenges from that point in time because obviously moving forward, I presume a few years, clarify the timeline of this as much as you like. But obviously we come into the strength and conditioning, personal training background that you have, and we also come into the parachute regiment. Now with that, as I understand it, and correct me, as I say, if I'm wrong with any of the timeline with this, but it was actually an injury to do with that took you back out of the parachute regiment. What was it that actually happened there, and did that influence your transition into running from that point?
It definitely didn't transition me into running. It kind of put a halt to all of that. I had the sports science degree background, the personal training, strength and conditioning, was doing competitive age group duathlons at the time. So went to Limerick for the European Championships. Unfortunately, had a bike mechanical there, which was the DNF. So I did things there, qualified for the Worlds, wasn't allowed to go because I joined the military and they didn't let me go because I was in training for the parachute regiment at the time. So that was unfortunate. Otherwise, I would have kept that going. But training for the parachute regiment and the physical aspect was why I joined. I wanted that challenge, and it was the itch I had to scratch before I got too old that I could join. So I was 27, probably going on 28 at the time, and I had to do it. So, you know, the job, the money that I was earning was decent. I had a decent flat that was my own, and I was going to take a massive pay cut to go into the military, not on a military wage, but on a training wage, which was not very good. So it was a big thing to do that and take that step and a commitment. And yeah, going in, did all of that. So running became quite a big thing because you can't be a slouch in the parachute regiment. You've got to be fit, and they push you to be fit. Obviously, I went in with a good level of fitness, so I really enjoyed it, and that aspect was good. But you were still beasted. It didn't matter how fit you were or how unfit you were made to work. You know, even from a point of view, if you were someone was slower or came last or someone made a mistake, you were all punished for it. You know, it brings about that team collective. So running was still quite a big thing then. And then the parachute incident I had was, it was a nighttime parachute jump in training, and low level sort of drop. It's a static line. You're talking about 1,000 feet maximum, maybe a little bit less, and you just you can't see anything because it's at night. There's no lights, and obviously within a combat role, that's what they want. They don't want the enemy to see you. So jumping out of the plane, you can see the lights of the motorway and so on, cars on the motorway, but then you drop your kit between your legs, and it's on a line, so you've got basically a couple of tenths of a second when that hits the floor to sort of brace. So you're kind of like there listening the whole time, trying to get ready to brace. It's quite unnerving. The actual going out of the plane's a rush. It was a buzz, and that was something I hated flying. That was the other thing. I hated flying. Still don't enjoy it, but I had to do it because I hated flying. So that was my rationale for going in. I love the fitness. I hate planes and I hate flying. So I've got to go and jump out of a plane. So it makes it all the sweeter that I actually jumped out of a plane and then broke a leg or an ankle, whatever you want to call it, damaged my knee and then damaged my hip. Probably the first jump I ever did was the nicest, softest landing ever, with obviously no experience. And then this one, just listening for the ground and then crack. But it's an allowable injury risk that the military, that the parachute regiment have. They allow for a certain amount of casualties if they were dropping into a battle that was going to happen. And people have had a lot worse injuries than what I have doing their parachute jumps, for sure. Broken backs and things. So my actual injury wasn't very bad. It wasn't bad in a way, but it put me out for a long time, and it got me medically discharged because the ankle wasn't such a big deal. I'd broken that several times before with rugby as well. The knee, again, that was knee meniscal tear damage, so that got cleaned out with a bit of keyhole surgery and gave me a bit of trouble for a while. But again, the ankle, the knee, I don't really feel anymore, but it was the hip that was the problem on the opposite side. And I don't know whether that was caused by the jump or whether it was a compensatory effect afterwards, when I was still on base, on crutches, still having to carry kit, machine guns and so on, hobbling around. And I think that perhaps damaged me more the actual time on base afterwards. When you don't have any transport, you have to hop around base and you're on one leg, crutches. Had surgery on the hip, and they did they thought it was like a labral tear, which is quite an uncommon injury, and it's quite hard to fix. But it had something called a David Lloyd procedure, which is essentially some sort of a hernia repair procedure where they mesh it and so on, but it wasn't a hernia. And I didn't think it did much good, but I was in Headley Court, their rehab place, and nothing got better. You do the exercises given, and it just didn't improve. So I got medically discharged and didn't run for about 8 years. So my running career as such was non-existent until 3.5 years ago. So 3 years, February just gone, that's when I started running, because I saw a very good physio guy called Jamal over at Lillishore Abbey there. He's one of the physios, worked with a lot of Olympians and so on. And ironically, I'd been to a lot of physios and nothing had helped, and I couldn't ride a bike or anything because of this hip. It was just like always a dull ache within my groin. And he sorted me out pretty much straight away with just releasing my hip flexors that were deeply rooted in my stomach. And he got me back running straight away. And from then, as soon as I could run, I ran a marathon within the first week of being back running. It's such a buzz to be able to do something that you thought you wouldn't do again, to actually then be able to do it relatively pain-free. So then I went OTT and just went crazy for it, and forever thankful for that.
Wow, that is an incredible story, John. I mean, I knew it was quite remarkable, as I say, when I read up on some of what you've been doing, but I didn't realize the length of time you were actually out of the game, to be quite honest. So I think it's extraordinary coming back from that. I knew it was a while, but that many years to what you're doing now, absolutely extraordinary, and it shows people never to give up, really, doesn't it? It's amazing. So, okay, so from running a regular marathon, which is a feat in itself, to the inspiration to run ultras and to really push yourself to the limits and potentially beyond. Now, with this, we'll get into the Amazon, we'll get into a couple of the past races, a couple of the up and coming, and then the mindset stuff. But with that initial inspiration, after running that first marathon, what was it that lit the fire in you to say, okay, now I'm going to push this as far as I can and do the crazy distances that you've done since then, and of course the wild terrain that you've been running across as well. What was the initial spark for that, please?
I think it was because I've got dogs, German Shepherds, Malinois, Dutch herders, that I was just running bigger distances with them, and they would do it. They would eat it up as well. So we'd end up running 30 miles. I'd always enjoyed being out in, say, Snowdonia, because I'd always lived relatively close by to there. So I'd had dogs all my life. So that was kind of my thing. I would always go and take one up the mountains with me or whatever. So I could do that with them and just going out every day. And then I was like, well, road marathons don't really interest me. Never actually ran one. So I just saw events, and I think I came across ultra running, and I came across some people that were doing it, and I started following it and thought I should have a go at that. And I just signed up randomly for a couple in North Wales, having no idea what to expect. And yeah, just went for it. Just literally turned up from not really doing much apart from running mainly out from my house along the canals. So no real elevation, nothing. And I was training around work. And at the time I was traveling from my house to Royal Preston Hospital, working there, doing 12-hour shifts, traveling back. And that was 86 miles, 87 miles each way, plus a 12-hour shift. So I was out of the house for about 16 odd hours a day, sometimes 17, or if there was a crash, 18 hours. I'd get back and then I'd go running at like midnight, something like that, early hours of the morning, and it was quiet, at least on the canals, a couple of dogs. So we used to just go and do that, and that'd be me, back to bed, repeat, go back to work, and so on. And I remember signing up for a race, and it was spectacularly failing at the race, but it was a 2-day multi-stage race, and I thought that I would just be able to rock up and go and have a crack at this race. They don't do it anymore, unfortunately, because it was a brilliant race, although I didn't get to start day 2 of it because I'd literally come from work that morning, finished my shift after doing 12 hours. I'd already been up 24 hours before the race had started and set off from Aberfoyle's distillery. And I was completely shocked because it wasn't actually a path or anything. It was just like through the bracken, over the river, up that hill. And I'd never experienced that. I didn't have a damn clue. And I think I probably did about a marathon distance in that over Snowdonia, and absolutely, like, my knee literally locked up, seized up, because I just wasn't conditioned to that kind of racing. But it sort of made me realize, I need to do something a little bit different. This is what it's like, is it? Okay. And sort of one of the lads that he's sponsored as well by a couple of the same brands as I am now, he actually went and won that. So kind of started following him and then seeing what he was doing, and got more and more into the ultra running scene by just seeing the races, and like you do, then you watch things on YouTube or Instagram or look at someone's Strava, and there's all these different aspects, and you learn a little bit, and you generally the best way to learn is by doing things and failing. And so I've done that and failed a few times, and learn. Even when you win, you learn and take things away. So steep learning curve with things, but then I was always reading up or watching things to try and improve and get a better understanding of it. So that can be from foot care to kit to strategies, just tips of people that have done the races. You know, you can learn a lot. And then I sort of kind of went back to my sort of training aspect of things and related my knowledge into this sport, and it's taken me a while to figure things out. But yeah, I think I've gradually started to figure things out, but then there's still challenges ahead, which hopefully my training will work on that as well.
Absolutely. I love that, because do you know what's very cool about hearing that, John, is the fact that for a lot of people listening to this who have particular goals or particular aims that they're aiming for, people expect to have the results in a certain amount of time, don't they? And the fact that you built this up, the fact that your first race didn't go well, it really puts a very human perspective, if you like, on something that's perceived to be way beyond what normal people can do. And the fact that you built up to it in that way, I think is extraordinary. So we'll touch on a couple of races with the Amazon and everything. We'll touch on your future plans, then a few mindset topics. The Amazon race itself. Now, obviously, with this, we have there's a lot of different aspects to this. So basically, the best way I can think of to do it is for you to describe this in your own words, because I was reading about this race and you're running through different ecosystems, different weather patterns. You've got elevation at different levels. So there's a lot of aspects that come into this. There's probably heat and humidity and that part of the world to account for. So with this, I'm going to lead this into the mindset side of things. But in your own words, can you describe what the experience was like in that race itself, covering the distance, what the rainforest was like, how you accounted for such variable climate and terrain as well in terms of preparation? There's a few different aspects to this, so I know it's a pretty big question. Sorry, you know.
Yeah, I think I put it this way: I've never been so cold in my life. Considering I've been to the Arctic, I was colder in the Amazon. I was wetter than I've ever been anywhere in the Amazon, and the most humid and obviously hot as well. And I'll explain that further. Obviously, the Amazon is the rainforest, so it actually rains a hell of a lot. And it did on that trip. It rained heavily, particularly in the evenings. It was torrential. You started at an altitude. The race started at just over 3,000 meters in altitude. So it's very high. The oxygen there's less sort of usable oxygen at that level, so breathing is a lot harder. And from that point, the start, it drops dramatically over the first stage. So actually, by the end of stage one, I think you're about 1,500 meters. So you've dropped half the elevation that you started at. So actually, from after stage one, breathing is pretty much back to normal. Or certainly by the end of stage two, it's more like being in the UK again from a breathing aspect. But you've dropped a lot of elevation, so going downhill with a heavy pack, a pack that might weigh 11 kilos with water. Some people's is probably heavier, some people's a little bit lighter. But if you can imagine, apart from one steep uphill, which I think was about 1,000 feet of climbing, the rest of it you were running downhill. So the loading of your shins, legs, everything, with that extra weight on your back, is some strength and conditioning work that you actually need to know prior to going. And it was something I certainly focused on, because I went off hard, fully expecting the stage to be quite quick for me, but also like quite high impact and quite brutal on the body. I'd done some heat training prior to going and some altitude training, and that definitely helped. But I say the first night before the race started, I was so cold because you're in hammocks the whole time. So you carry your own hammock, and obviously sleeping bag and stuff like that. You can carry a sleeping mat, which you get cold basically by the air underneath you, underneath the hammock. And that's how the cold gets you, really. But as a racer, you're not wanting to really carry an extra anything more than you have to. And I like my food, so I tend to carry a bit more food. That's why my packs are generally a little bit heavier to fuel myself. So yeah, I was glad after that first night to get going and bomb it down there. And then get stage 2, you just initially you're not really feeling like you're in the jungle because it's quite high. Then you drop down and then you start coming into more jungle, and then the guys that have actually made the route, the locals, they do a fantastic job. And because it had been COVID prior to this race, the jungle where the route used to be had grown back. So these guys, these locals, went into the rainforest for months, and they had a cook that went with them, and they went and lived in the rainforest, hacking away with their machetes to basically get us a route that had never ever been run before through these national parks. So you really are somewhere where no one's ever been. It's crazy. And yeah, again, from the different camps, it got warmer, but we still got rained on a hell of a lot, particularly I think the first, second, third, fourth stage, I think it was just raining heavily, and everything, the floor was just mud. It was pretty miserable at times, but then during the day it would become more and more hot, and the humidity on top of that. And although you're under a lot of canopy for large periods of time, there was a stage, and there's a particular photo of me at the end of this stage, and the race director was laughing again. I've never seen you look so bad. And it was right, because I'd come out of the jungle and onto a track, basically a 4x4 type track. And the last few miles, or however many miles, were pretty much on this track. So there was no cover. And the sun and the heat, and I think it was about 35 degrees, but the intensity of the sun plus humidity, it was so brutal by the end of it. And it was all lumpy sort of roads as well. It's never flat in the Amazon. If anyone thinks the Amazon's flat, you're so wrong. It's so sharp and steep, the terrain there. It's you have to see it to believe it, because I literally was crashing through bamboo trees trying to catch them, because it is so muddy there, on some descents, and there's rocks and obviously bamboo which has been cut by these machetes. You're falling on that, and you're cutting yourself quite badly. Me and the other lad had like literally holes in our shorts from where we'd fallen and cut ourselves. So yeah, the mud, and even trying to go up some of the climbs, it was so muddy and wet and dirty that you were trying to put your hands places, but you had to be careful what you were grabbing onto, because these trees have these nasty sort of ants that would bite you quite nastily, but obviously spiders, poison dart, all these sort of things, stepping across snakes that were on the path, like literally crazy things. But then you're doing these massive water crossings as well, holding onto ropes and fast flowing water, because hitting there first, they actually adjusted where the rope was to take you across the water, because a couple of us were like nearly swept off our feet and away, and that would have been a bad day, for sure. But you can't, the rain there, the rivers will change drastically, because obviously it's not something you can control. That the amount of water and downfall that you get then affects these rivers massively, and they can change in an instant the amount of water going through them. So yeah, there's so many variables there, and it's truly epic. You can't understand it until you go there, from being so cold to being ridiculously hot, completely wet, drained, heat, humidity, altitude. Yeah, there's so many things that you actually have to factor in.
Wow, absolutely incredible. I mean, the thing is, John, it's like describing another world, isn't it? To someone who hasn't been there. It's like the things that you mentioned there, some of them obviously make perfect sense. There's certain things you never would think of necessarily unless you've actually been there. So it's extraordinary. And I have to ask to jump into some mindset topics here. We've talked a little bit about the physical training. We've touched on that, but one of the things that fascinates me with this, there's quite a few aspects that you have to do to mentally prepare. So to give that some context, things like focus, for example, not being distracted, concentrating for long periods of time. You're running through the jungle, you can't really daydream and think, oh, look at that, because if you trip and snap an ankle or something, you're in deep trouble out there. There's things like obviously pushing through the pain barrier. There's bound to come at different times. There's things like being calm under pressure, because things are bound to go wrong in such basically hostile terrain. So there's a lot of things that come into it up here, which is something that fascinates me. And those are a few I thought of. But how do you? We can do this in two phases. First of all, how you mentally prepare for the race and build yourself up for it up here. But there's also obviously when the race is happening, particularly through the Amazon, through such brutal terrain, fascinating terrain, I'm sure, but brutal from the description, how you stay with it, because there has to be a mental edge to this, doesn't there, as well as the physical edge. So can you share with us a little bit about your mental processes basically for doing what you do in whichever way that flows,
Yeah. It definitely starts from prior to going out to the race. The hard work you do in training is most of it, I would say, because I'll deliberately push myself really hard, be tough on myself, make myself tired, do things I don't want to do, because that's part of the mentality. When you're tired, you still have to do things. That was the way in the military. It's kind of the way in the ultra races as well. And I always knew that they weren't going to be ridiculously long days for me out there. I mean, 12 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is, it's not that long in the grand scheme of things. I knew I'd done a lot of work, whether it was the heat training, time on feet, running, just on the treadmill, looking at a breeze block wall. I would do that, and I'd do it because if I can run for 2 hours on a treadmill looking at a breeze block, well, when I go to the jungle, I'm going to have a lot more interesting things to watch and keep my eyes on and look out for that aren't going to sting me, bite me, whatever, try and kill me, or trip over, fall. So from a mentality point of view, it was pushing myself in training, knowing that I'd done the best I could prior to going. It gives you that confidence as well that actually I haven't let myself down prior to going. I've put the work in. I can be confident going out there. If I was going out there and I hadn't really been honest with myself and hadn't done the work and so on, then obviously mindset would be different. But I knew I'd gone and I'd had a good amount of training. I'd done as much work as I could, really. And I always think, well, if I've done that, then I can't be too hard on myself, because I know I've given it 100%. And then, you're not guaranteed with going out to these races, because there's so much that can happen. But you try and mitigate that by doing the strength work in the gym to prevent injuries and so on. I did all of that. I did the running from the fitness. I prepared for the heat and humidity by going in a chamber. I did that with the altitude, and then sleeping in a head tent and so on. And so I tried to cover all these bases. So that was the prior to going out there. So I thought, well, when I go out there, I can give it some gas early doors. I like to go. I like to set off. I like to set the pace, get a lead, and then I can manage the race from there. If someone wants to then beat me, they have to be faster than me after the first stage and pull time back. If I run with the person who's in second, that's never going to happen. And that was kind of how that race played out. I ran off on my own for the first few stages, and then I got to sit back and chill and just control it, not pushing myself hard, but just running with my nearest competitor. And it was great because he was such a nice guy as well, that I had a right blast, which made my experience a lot better, because I wasn't just on my own for such a period of time. I could actually developed a good friendship with him, great mindset, and we pushed each other on the last stage as well, which was great. Bar as doing a detour, but yeah, I forgot as well with the terrain out there. We ran about 15 kilometers at least down through a river, and I just remember us seeing a coral snake, or it might have been a fake coral snake, because I know you get fake ones, but they're probably the most poisonous snake, I think. And we just saw this cruising through the river next to us as you were up to nearly your chest height at points, but generally it was sort of roundabout sort of knee level. And you just think, what else is in this river? Like in the middle of nowhere, you're running down this river. It's just crazy. So yeah, that was a good point for me, that the work had been done prior to going out, that then while I was out there, set off quite hard, because I've done the altitude training. The altitude shouldn't affect me too badly. The heat shouldn't affect me as badly. Obviously, people come from different parts of the world to these races, so some people will be more adapted and used to the heat than I am. But I thought, well, I can deal with it all, so let's just give it some. And that's what I did. And I think probably the hardest part of that race was when myself and the lad who was in second, on the final stage, the long stage, we ended up doing about another 16 kilometers, probably 2 hours of racing on top of the others. They hadn't put the flags out of the locals in time, so we went past what would have been the turning and ended up doing a huge extra loop through some pretty nasty terrain. And you go through areas where they're just preparing the drugs as well. That's the other thing. Obviously, drugs is quite a big thing out there, manufacturing. And they have to allow for where they can do the race, and they're actually told where they can do the race by these cartels, I believe. But yeah, we ended up doing this huge, big extra loop and went back into, which was the prior checkpoint, and we weren't very happy. I was really unhappy, actually. I knew a couple of the medics there, but they knew we weren't happy. So we were kicking off a bit. They were on the radio. What should we do? We ended up doing it, and then we ended up having to went to where the flags were now and went off down there, because they were really easy to see as well, but they just weren't there prior. So we ended up doing that, and then I remember us catching up with like the guys that were in like first and second place that day, and they were like, what are you doing here? It was like, well, we've done an extra loop, so we'd probably put about an hour and a half, 2 hours on these guys, because we set off at a ferocious pace in the morning, and we really went for it. We were trying to nail it, and by the end of it, we'd had enough. We were fueling wise, we were both out of fuel pretty much, because you allow for a certain amount in a race and try and manage it. And I sort of had in my time in my head that stage would take me, and it ended up taking a lot longer because of that detour. And then towards the end, we're obviously like running on fumes, no fuel. It's still very hot, it's still humid. We couldn't wait to get to the finish line, because we were just like, you know what, I've had enough of this now. I've had enough of the Amazon. Let's just do this. I'm not coming back. Never again. Never again. And then we got a cold beer in our hand at the end of the race, and it was all good. So it's an amazing race. Absolutely amazing, but brutal as well.
Wow. Absolutely. I mean, I love your descriptions of this, John, because I feel like I'm there as you're describing it, if that makes sense, because you put that across in such a vivid and descriptive way, something that is sort of way out of bounds of most people's day-to-day lives. It's absolutely an incredible achievement. So, and I'm glad we touched on the mental side of that as well, because it is something that, with what we talk about, we've illustrated bits and pieces of that as we've gone along, but you've touched on it very nicely there. We'll talk about the future. I want to give a brief mention to the Arctic race as well before we move on to your future plans. One or two more mindset things, and we'll wrap this up. But I have to give a mention to the Arctic, because it's it's something you don't hear every day. It's equally as extraordinary, I would say, to the Amazon. It's amazing to hear that the Amazon was colder. I mean, that is really something. let's talk a little bit about it from that point of view. The same thing, really, in your own words, because obviously with these races, if I sort of hone in on this aspect of it over here, we'll miss something that's over here because, as you say, there's a lot of things that you wouldn't think of unless you've been there. So running in a cold, presumably desolate environment of that nature, can you share with us a little bit of the stories about that race and how it went, what you enjoyed about it, maybe a few of the challenges, just very similar to what you just did with the Amazon, if that's all good, please.
Yeah, I'll clarify with the cold. I mean, the Arctic was down at -38 at the coldest point, going over the first sort of stage, which was a bit more of a mountain. But I was colder in the Amazon because you don't take as much clothing. You obviously pack what you need, and then it gets warmer as it goes on. But with hanging in a hammock, you felt colder because obviously the kit wise, what I'm carrying there is very different. In the Arctic, I knew that I was carrying warm kit. So actually, I was never cold in the Arctic. Some people really suffered and got airlifted out, one guy. But for me, I was never cold. Your boots, your shoes would all freeze, and you know everything, like you had to smash the ice off your feet to get them out of the shoes at the end of the day. So it was brutally cold, but it was, if you've got layers and you're carrying the layers and you layer correctly and you're moving, then actually it wasn't an issue at all for me. So from that point of view, again, it's being prepared, training for it. And I was actually more dehydrated in the Arctic initially because I had to learn that my soft flasks were freezing up, the bike valves. So I had to learn, I was only drinking at checkpoints initially. So my performance the first couple of days was quite diminished, so to speak, because I was like, I didn't figure it out. And then I actually figured out I needed to put warm water, because they had hot water at the checkpoints, put them in the soft flasks. And then when I was drinking out of the soft flasks, the valves that you get, I'd have to blow back through them to get rid of the water, so that the water that was residual water wasn't freezing in the air, and had insulated soft flasks anyway for out there. But that was sort of the trick I had to get. And then I was using like sugary sort of nutrition anyway that would stop the freezing point as well. Then it was, see, the freezing point was lower than what it would be for water alone with that solution. So they were a couple of things, and once I got that sorted, the race became a lot easier. But yeah, it is very the place itself. I've just seen pictures of it actually without any snow, and it's like 24 hours of daylight, and they don't have a night at certain times in the year at the Arctic. So I've just seen a friend who actually works out there who did the Ice Ultra. He sent some pictures before, and it's incredible. They've got these nice sandy beaches on these lakes, and that was what we were running over, these frozen lakes. So to see that, complete contrast, but it was very much difficult because you could see for miles at points. You would go through these forests in the Arctic and so on, but then you would come out to these vast open expanses and just see just snow, and you know you were going that way, and it's just very long, very monotonous at times. And so mindset wise for that, it was just a case of keep plodding. But yeah, complete different experience. But it was, I like that about the racing. I like the contrast. I like the different extreme environments. But I'd certainly say it's easier to race in a colder environment than a hot environment, because you can layer up, you can put clothes on in a cold environment. As long as you've got the right kit and are prepared, then you can allow for that. Whereas if you're hot in the Amazon, you can't, you've only got minimal layers on anyway. For that heat, you can't, you have to try and condition yourself, but there's no escape. Obviously, you get to river, you put a wet towel on the back of your neck or whatever, just trying to cool down. But it's easier in the Arctic because you've got the kit. You don't need to, if you're hot, obviously you can take a layer off, but there, if you're cold, you just put a layer on, and it's a lot easier from that point of view. So for me, plus the varying terrain, the terrain's a lot different in the Amazon. The Arctic was considerably more easy in my eyes. I guess coming from the UK and training on mountains, that when it's winter I'd be in the snow on mountains anyway. That it was just more of an easier challenge for me, but still good, still tough. But yeah, definitely more manageable, I think. Less injury risk too.
Yeah, well, it makes sense from that point of view, but well, saying that the Arctic was easier, that puts into perspective a lot of things that you do, doesn't it? And how you test yourself, how you push yourself. So the last couple of things, John, to touch on with this, obviously future plans, because as I said to you at the beginning, before we started recording, I said that I think it's really cool how you have pushed yourself so far. You know, you've been to these extreme environments, you've been to places that a lot of people will, never get to see. There's so many different aspects, but you still want to go further. You still want to try new challenges. As I said before, I've read a few written interviews, and one of them was where you were saying basically you've got the itch to go again and try something different, and words to that effect. And so I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about what you've got coming up. Obviously, with the future, you can go as far ahead in time or as close to the present day as you want. I don't mind what sort of timeline we give this, but just to get a feel for what is lighting your fire, what is motivating you from this point forward, basically what the next challenge is going to be.
Yeah, so I fly out to Kyrgyzstan in 1 week's time, and that's for a 5-stage self-sufficient race. That is basically, it's a mountain ultra, so it's at altitude. So I've been training for altitude at the moment. The race is all above 3,000 meters, but it's between 3,000 and 4,000 meters. So it's significant altitude out there. So I've been trying to do quite a bit of work for that. So really, when I look at races, I have plans for different races, but I never overlook the one that's coming up. So I had the spine race that I've just done. That was purely the focus. Once I'd done that, great, bang, that's finished. I had a couple of days to recover, and then I was on the bike, and that was it. That's done, dusted. Great, I'll talk about it, whatever, but I'm training now for the next one. So Kyrgyzstan's taken my whole attention now, and it will do until it's done. After that, I have the Dragon's Back race, which is another mountain-based race. It's not self-sufficient. It's a stage race, but you get fed at the end of the day. You've just got to carry enough whilst you're on the mountain for that day, and it's a brutal race. It's a lot longer than Kyrgyzstan in the way that each day is about 40 miles and about 10,000 feet of elevation, something like that. But Kyrgyzstan's different because that's all at altitude. You're carrying probably 10, 11 kilos of weight on your back, which will obviously gradually get lighter each day, the food that you're eating out of your pack. So it's different, but it's good conditioning that will lead into that as well, which is kind of why I plan those 2 races. But I'll always focus purely on the one I'm doing. So all my training at the moment has been for Kyrgyzstan. And yeah, that's why I'm sort of thrashing myself at the moment for the next week. And then I go out there a week prior to the race, pretty much to relax, recover, go up to altitude there as well, try and get a bit more time up there at the altitude, get up nice and high, spend some good time up there, and pretty much just acclimatise. But the hard work will have been done back here for me. So it's more a case of relaxing, recovering, getting used to the altitude out there, and then obviously the race. So yeah, that'll be good. And once that's done, then the focus will change again once back, and around work as well, and everything else. It's obviously the commitments that when you come back, you then have to work twice as hard to catch up being self-employed, and you work hard before going away for the very same thing to have that time off. And I always say this is these are my holidays, these races where I'll go and torture myself and you know, smash myself to bits. I could do a holiday when I come back usually, but usually it's straight back into work and so on. But it's my holiday that I actually switch off and relax when I go away. And even when I'm doing these big long stages, it's great because I can actually switch off. I can just look at the environment around me, and I don't have to think too much. It's quite easy. All I have to think is, am I drinking enough? Should I be eating? Are my feet okay? You know, is there anything I need to do? And then actually, once it's done for that day, I just have to get prepared for the next day and relax and recover. So essentially, it's very, very easy because you're away from a lot of the social media as well and distractions like that. So yeah, it's a different way of life, but quite nice actually to reset by being away.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I think it's testament to the type of person you are, John, and everything you've achieved, how the race is a holiday, how the Arctic was easier than the Amazon, some of the things you've said, I love it. There's actually some great little quotes in there because I love the outlook on that. Um, as we wrap this up and as we sort of come towards the final stage for people's attention spans, you know what that's like nowadays and everything. Obviously, when it comes to the lessons you've learned along the way, the life lessons, quote unquote, that I mentioned earlier, we touched on a few of those, and we've touched on them quite nicely throughout this talk because quite a number of the things you've said illustrate those. Putting this one across from the point of view of advice for people, people who want to achieve certain dreams, achieve certain goals. Obviously, you've achieved a great deal in races, but you're also a self-employed person. You've competed in other sports. You've done a lot of things in your life, being in the military. So you're in a good position to give a couple of tips for people who basically want to achieve their dreams, as cheesy as that sounds, to chase your dreams. I mean, it's true, isn't it? So, what would be one or two essential ingredients? Because it's too big of a question to ask, everything about this. So, if we had to narrow it down to one, two, three key lessons you've learned along the way that you would want to pass along to people who want to achieve a big goal, whether it's in running or whether it's in something totally different. I don't mind. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of intangible qualities. There's focus, determination, self-belief, self-confidence. There's a number of things you've mentioned, and I just wanted to hit a few of those home before we wrap this up with what would be one or two key pieces of advice you'd give to people who want to achieve a big goal, if that all makes sense, please.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will talk about doing something and they'll say, "Oh, I'd love to do that," or "I really want to do this at some point," or maybe next year or whatever. No, don't say that. Say, right, I'm going to do it now. I'll sign up for it if it's a race, or if you want to start your own business, stop talking about it and just do it. That then makes you do things. If you say you're going to do stuff, it's great because a lot of people will say they want to do something their whole life and then it becomes too late. They either have an illness, become too old, or things change, whether you have family, children, things like that. Obviously life gets in the way with different things. So if you want to do something, you've got to make it happen. It's no good finding excuses to why you can't do it. Actually just alter your outlook on things, and if it's a bit scary, do it. Because then you have to confront that, and then you have to find the solution, find the way. And by doing that, then actually you realize you're far more capable than what you thought you were. And I just think that's massively important. It's like the parachute regiment, I hated flying. I didn't want, jumping out of a plane. It's a terrible idea when you don't like flying. But you know what? I was really glad I did it. And am I over flying? Do I like flying? No. Do I? Heck. Would I want to jump out of a plane again? Not really, no. But would I? Yes, I would. And it's that, because then actually it makes you feel like you're alive, and you then hunt out the next challenge. You find your motivation, your drive for what's next, and when you believe in yourself and you believe you can do things, then you start to do more and more and more. And that's certainly the way things have happened with me from a racing perspective. But even in life, you get sort of, say the words, kicked in the balls quite a bit, and people let you down and things. But that's part of life. You have to just get on with it, move on. It's next. You can't just sort of bury your head in the sand. You've got to get out there, and you need to keep moving and keep doing things. And when you stop, then that's obviously when sort of life gets the better of you, and people get down, and people start saying about their mental health and things like this. And I'm very much of an older school train of thought that, well, mental health and all these different aspects, PTSD is coined a lot now, and it used to be something that was coined mainly out of the military from people that had seen terrible things, or potentially different jobs, PTSD within the paramedic side of things, which I've been in. You heard of it then because people go to horrible jobs. But now, and particularly with working within the healthcare sector, I see people saying, teenagers coming in saying they've got PTSD. They've never had, anything to give them PTSD. A lot of these phrases and things are actually trendy now, and like buzzwords, and it's infectious in a wrong way. Obviously people do have problems completely, and I get that, and there is a huge mental health issue, but I think a lot of people don't have these issues. It's become a trend, and people jump on the bandwagon with it, and I see it a lot on Instagram and social media and things, and I just I struggle with it because you have to get on with things. I've always been taught that you just get up, get on with things, and move on, and I've never sort of been of that mindset, and I think it's today's culture within society, and they're being brought up in a way that the world's become a little bit soft. And people will probably be shouting at me on this now or hating what I'm saying, but it's the way I see it. And actually, I'll always speak my mind, and I'll always say things. I've got respect for everyone, and but I just think that the world's gone a little bit soft. Back, World War II, that was trying times for people, and we forget how hard those times were for people. I obviously wasn't around then, but you hear the stories and you see actually they were on rations, they were in trenches, and you didn't really have a childhood at that day and age, and people were being shipped off all over the place. So we're in a very fortunate time that we're not war torn or anything like that. We've got it so easy, it's making us soft, I think. And I always think with that the mindset, it's good to actually struggle a little bit and have some tough times, because then it makes you grateful and realize actually we're very, very privileged, very lucky in this day and age what we've got, compared to others and others in other countries at the moment as well. We're lucky being in the UK.
Absolutely. But John, I knew that would be a good answer, but that was a really, really good answer, because I like how you've broadened the topic there, and looked at some of these lessons, not just in relation to yourself, but in relation to society as a whole and the world that we're a part of. I completely agree. I get where you're coming from. And again, you will have seen this more again, being in some of these different countries, being involved in the paramedic side of things, being in the military, having risked your life with some of the things you've personally done. It was never a guarantee that you would make it out of some of these situations with the parachute side of things, with the Amazon. So obviously it's a very, very good perspective on things. And I agree that today a lot of people lack that broader perspective of things. There's a perspective deficit, in my view. And it's a very, very good way of closing out on it, especially what you said there about gratitude and about growing through the struggle. But there's quite a few things you mentioned there, very powerful advice. So I'm grateful to you for sharing that, actually.
The problem is, it's not even their fault, is it? Though it's actually society that's making people this way. It's not people, it's not their fault. It's actually the upbringing, not necessarily just from the parents or whatever, but actually it's the whole society and the way things are run now, and culture. It's such a huge, it's on a huge scale, isn't it? It's not like you're made soft, far from it. It's I guess it's like a nanny culture with things. But yeah, it's something there's been a drastic shift anyway, particularly even since, I mean, I've just turned 40 not long ago. From my time, I've seen it over the years, the big change, and it's striking, really is. So yeah, it is what it is, though. I don't think there's any real fix or cure for that, but I think yeah, you have to sort of let people remember or try and educate them about the past and how lucky they are in this day and age, which before we forget all about the past and then everyone's just about here and now, and that becomes the status quo. Well, actually, look how hard people have had it in the past, or otherwise it'll be forgotten. And I think that'd be a sorry state if that was to happen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's there's quite a few things you've mentioned there, including some aspects of how people can improve their own lives by pushing themselves, by pushing through certain boundaries, the gratitude, the things you mentioned. But yeah, learning from people who've gone before, because the irony that I've personally observed with this is you speak to somebody like, for example, I had great grandparents and people who were obviously my grandparents grew up in the war era, but I had great grandparents who were alive until I was a teenager, who actually, his great grandfather actually served and all these types of things. And the funny thing is, they saw some horrific things, from seeing people killed, seeing their own brothers or family members, killing other people, all sorts of things. And they've been through that, and there is trauma there. But I've observed that those people are a lot happier in a lot of situations than people are now in the era when we've got everything. And when you say about going to, say, the Amazon, or going to somewhere that's, technically a poorer country, and they have a lot less resources, they have a lot of hardships in a lot of other ways that we don't. But I've observed a lot of people from those places are happier. I'm generalizing slightly here because it's not literally, but there's a lot more joy in those people, and they don't have a lot of they have different types of issues. They have life-threatening issues, but they don't have the rates of depression, the rates of anxiety, the rates of, as you mentioned, post-traumatic stress, even though they have more reason to, because they have seen a lot more horrific things, experienced them firsthand. I've noticed quite a sharp disparity between these things. And as you say, with the older generations going back, they had a lot less than what we had. They had to be a lot more stoic. They had to be a lot more, to have these traits. But at the same time, they seem more happy and more grateful for what they do have. Whereas I've observed, I mean, I'm 25, right? So even in the time since I was, even if I look at the gap now, where, like, say I'm 25, somebody now's growing up to sort of 17, 18, even a few years younger than me. Even with that, in my own generation, there's a gap, I feel now, where people are just, they have everything, but they're very, very unhappy. And obviously, when you look at that from a broad social structure, as I say, I am generalizing a little bit, but if you were living in a society where a lot of people feel that they're traumatized, they feel depressed, they want to die, a lot of people, drug use is epidemic, anxiety, depression, etc., then obviously something's wrong with that picture, because for the rates to be so high and for so many people to be struggling, something's wrong, and I really like the fact that you've put that across, in the sense that there are some potential solutions people can do on an individual basis, and on a social basis, because, as you say, not just the parents, but a lot of this is, I feel personally, in the education system as well, that a lot of this sort of thing is encouraged. So it's a very good aspect of a little bit of social commentary, a little bit of perspective on the world that we live in. And I think that your story illustrates that as well. John, to be honest, with some of the things you've achieved in your own life. It sort of feeds into those lessons, if you get what I mean. So brilliant, absolutely brilliant way to close out.
Right, thank you. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's definitely, I think there's coping structures and stuff that the sort of elderly have that we don't have nowadays. And like you said, in Peru, in the Amazon, they were really happy, the locals. They were really welcoming when we went into one village, and they were putting necklaces around your neck, and they were all smiling. They were all happy. They didn't have a worry in the world. They didn't have TVs. They didn't, they had nothing. They just would be there with themselves, and they were happy with that. And it's actually quite liberating and refreshing to see something like that and disconnect from sort of our own culture, and just to see that, and you actually realize that it's it is something that's with society here. And like I say, education, I think, is a massive thing. The educational structure here, something is wrong with how we're developed and so on nowadays. But I say it's a big issue to try and tackle, and not something that's going to be solved overnight, or probably in the next however many years, if ever. But it's interesting to speak to someone about it and see from someone else who's seen different things that there is probably an issue of sorts.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not something that can be solved overnight. You're right. It's not something that we can definitively cover every aspect of in this talk either. But at the same time, it is very, very prevalent. And we've seen it from similar perspectives. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, at the end of the day, life is a mind trip anyway. A lot of it's about what goes on up here. I've seen people who are millionaires who are miserable, and people who are as you say, very poor and have nothing, and they're happy. And with that, I'm not saying don't chase that goal. If you want to be a millionaire, go for it. But at the same time, you've got to have the right expectations of whether that will make you happy or not. And it's the biggest thing with people now that I see is I actually see a lack of inner peace and contentment and happiness and some of these simple things. And as you say, a lot of that comes from coming out the other side of a painful experience. I mean, a lot of that comes through gratitude, or even as you said, what you said about flying, realizing it's not that bad. I mean, I love that when you said about like jumping out of a plane, and flying, jumping out of a plane. And I thought, what a brilliant way of putting it, because it shows that concept of facing that fear. For example, it diminishes, it shrinks. Obviously, the more you move away from it, the more it grows, and the bigger it gets, and the worse it seems. So that's why I said, through this talk today, there's been quite a few things that you've highlighted through things you've actually done, which will it solve everybody's problems overnight? No. But then the good thing is, as you're listening to this, and as people are listening to this, maybe people who haven't met you, or maybe people that will meet you, some of that wisdom will filter down and reach those people where they're at with whatever they're working on. And hopefully they'll pick up a few things from it and put those into practice, because knowledge is only power when it's applied. But there's some very, very powerful things you've shared. So with that, John, it ticks the boxes for me, to be honest. I mean, one of those things, we've had the fun stories from your races, from your military days, rugby, shooting, everything, but we've also gone a little bit deeper. And I know with you, I'm always mindful with people who've done as much as you have. There's always more we could talk about, but for the length of time that we have had, it's been absolutely brilliant, because we've packed a lot in. So I'm just very grateful to you, not only for coming on the show, but also for being totally an open book and just sharing everything from your heart, basically, and very, very grateful and just appreciative of your time, to be honest.
No, thank you. Thanks very much for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.